The following is an example of some of the extra content that our YouTube members and Patreon supporters receive. We hope that you will enjoy this extra content and will be moved to support our work. Thank you. Hello and welcome to our second, Patreon's first Mana Machine Alert. Now, in this particular video, we are focusing again on a topic that's not necessarily the most flashy, but really, really interesting, and a discovery you might not have heard about. So with that, we are going to talk today about the Lachish Letters. Because one of the interesting things about the Lachish Letters was, while they were discovered in 1935 to 1938, it took a long time for archaeologists to process this info. So, what we had here is an article that came out in biblicalarchaeology.org and came out on May 19th. And it's from Bible History Daily, and it's entitled The Judahite Archive from the First Temple Period by Nathan Steinmeier. Now, this is a very, very important source, important set of letters for understanding the history of early Israel. Really important.
And the site is the site is a very well established dig.
These letters were discovered in situ, so they're not forgeries. That's one thing right there.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. And it's some of our oldest examples of Hebrew writing. That's also super important. And Lachish at this particular time, which is in the 6th century, the 7th to 6th centuries, is an Israelite city. It was occupied by the Israelites, and particularly the tribe of Judah. So it's in many ways represents the final days of Israelite culture prior to its fall to Babylon. So that is very, very interesting right there.
Yeah, they're stating that the letters come right before the destruction, before Nebuchadnezzar II.
Yeah.
In the earliest 6th century BC.
Yeah. Now, the authors of the letter basically state that there's some ambiguity as to what the letters actually represent. And they say that there are numerous interpretations of these letters, and that is actually true.
Because these are very small fragments.
These are small fragments.
We're not finding the entire letters.
No, we're not finding the entire letters or their short correspondence. Now, the question is, are they diplomatic correspondence? Are they a dossier of texts? Is it one text written out several times?
Well, some people have even conjectured these could be drafts of a single letter. I don't like how this sounds. Try it this way. No, I don't like this one. Let's try it this way. So, could be.
Could be, yeah. But this is what's called the archival problem. You've got an archive, but you don't know exactly the purpose of the archive. You know, whether it's an archive that formed from accident, as in you've had letters and threw them in a garbage pit, or they were intentionally kept to record something.
One theory is they're actually communications, incoming letters, sent to Lachish from smaller fortresses, possibly even Jerusalem.
And I think that's actually a pretty good summary.
Yeah, and they're saying because of the wide range of scribal hands, all possibilities could be true.
Yes, that is.
They could be incoming letters. They could be drafts of one letter. Some of them could be drafts.
Yeah.
It could be this mix.
A lot of research has been done on these letters, including, as you just pointed out, the various scribal hands. They have been able to show that certain letters were written by certain authors. Now, those authors are unnamed, but they can tell one author from another just by the scribal hand.
handwriting experts abound in this day and age as well.
Yeah. And there's no question at this point that we are dealing with old Hebrew cursive script. So again, this is in the First Temple period in the divided monarchy. So it comes with a certain historical context. Now, the article focuses on two particular letters that have biblical significance. And one of those letters is often called Lachish number 3. It is a letter from Hoseyahu to Yaush. And most scholars agree that Hoseyahu is likely the commander of the garrison stationed at Lachish. And Yaush appears to be the commander of the forces at Lachish, or probably the governor of the city. So it looks like one outranks the other.
Yes, and how they start is interesting.
It's fascinating. It's quite funny, in fact. The letter begins with Hoseyahu defending himself against an allegation raised by Yaush in a previous correspondence, which has not been preserved. The allegation appears to be that Hoseyahu is illiterate.
A claim he strongly rejects.
Now, that is fascinating all by itself. Because here's the thing. There are scholars even today that claim that the Israelites in the First Temple period were mostly illiterate.
Yeah, that the vast majority, there was only a few rare individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And here you have a
commander of a garrison, of a nearby garrison, and he is offended. He is offended.
He is adamantly saying, no, I can read. Thank you very much. And, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a commander, you have to know that the records are being kept accurately.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons he would be quite literate.
Yes. And there's more to this letter, but that I think is just all by itself tells us something about early Israelite culture. At least Iron Age Israelite culture, that literacy was something that was valued. And even military people who in the history of the world are not often literate. They're not often literate. In fact, literacy amongst most, say, military people in the Near East, in Europe, were illiterate.
Well, the foot soldiers, perhaps.
Even generals. If one of the things, for example, in Rome, it was not stylish to be literate as a military officer until Pompey learned to read Greek from his Greek slave. We know in Mesopotamia it was the same deal. Military men in Mesopotamia were generally not literate.
So what you're saying is this shows that ancient Israel may have been an exception to that.
It may have been an exception to that.
And that's a value they would have brought from Egypt with them.
Is general literacy.
So these are a very important find.
They are a very important find. Well, in Egypt, literacy varied. It varied. Like, for example...
But it was seen as one of the highest job positions you could have.
Oh, yeah. The scribe was very high. He could ascend the ranks all the way up to vizier.
Yeah, I remember you telling me one of the stories they said that the writing practices was basically the scribe saying, become a scribe so you don't have to become a soldier. Mm-hmm. Become a scribe so you don't have to become a farmer.
Yeah.
Become a scribe so you don't have to, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, the parity of the trades is what those documents are called.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely. And again, that becoming a scribe is a function of literacy.
Well,
Yeah, I
yes.
mean, that makes sense, of course, but
That ranked a little obvious. I was trying to see if there was a catch there. Or like, no, you
but they
just
weren't the
made a
only ones
really
that
obvious
were
statement.
but they weren't the only ones that were literate in Egypt either. Many craftsmen were literate. Many priests were literate. And
Well,
the nobility would send their children off to the royal cough to become literate.
well, I still remember those ostraca that were found where it was just the wife of a craftsman. She was literate, telling her friend to write her answer on the back because the boy carrying the message wasn't terribly bright.
Yeah, that comes from the Deir el Medina ostraca. But yeah, definitely. So, that's, as I said, that very first thing, that allegation of literacy and the affront to it. If this was a generally illiterate culture, that wouldn't matter.
Yeah, he would have just shrugged and says, "No, I'm literate. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
he would
Let's get
probably
on."
shrug and say, "No, I can fight well.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. I can fight well." So that's a big thing right there. Now, it also has two other pieces of news. First, that Konyahu, son of El Natan and commander of the army, had gone down to Egypt. The other thing is an unnamed prophet has sent a message to Yaush, which is described by only the word beware.
Now, again, this is right before Babylon attacks.
This is right before Babylon attacks. Now, the importance of this is going to come with the basically prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah gives us some information that sheds some light upon this ostraca. He talks about a Elnatan, son of Akbor, in Jeremiah 26:20-23, who he tells us went down to Egypt to bring Uriah the prophet back to Judah for execution. So, Kohenyahu, son of Elnatan, it's very, very tempting to connect that Elnatan to the Elnatan, son of Akbor.
So, not a clear, distinct connection.
Not a clear, distinct connection, but
probable.
But very suggestive. Very suggestive.
Interesting.
There's also that going down to, there might be, as I said, some indication that this Konyahu went after that prophet Uriah. So, but that interpretation remains uncertain because the prophet is not named here. But what is perhaps more interesting is a second, more cautious interpretation of this, which suggests, because one of the problems with that first interpretation that directly connects that letter to the trip to Egypt to pick up Uriah is the dating of those texts. Whereas that interpretation of the text, these letters are typically dated to a decade after that incident. So this letter's written after they'd gone and tried to get the prophet and came back. So it's uncertain if Konyahu was the guy that went down to Egypt to pick him up, even if the El Natan is the same person. But what I find more interesting is that second interpretation. In this interpretation, it is suggested that Konyahu's journey to Egypt was a kind of ambassadorial mission. During the reign of Zedekiah, Judah was caught between the forces of Egypt and the rising Babylonian Empire. The Judahite monarchy had tried to side with the Egyptians. They had tried to get Egypt's help. And against the urging of Jeremiah, they tried to forge an alliance with the pharaoh Hophra for protection. Egyptian, he's called Apire. Okay? We've recently found an inscription from Apire, the first one of its kind, which is a big stela. So we know that that pharaoh exists. And this is mentioned in Ezekiel 17:15. So that is actually a much more interesting hypothesis that this may be the person that was sent down to Egypt to basically secure that military aid from Pharaoh. So that second interpretation I find a lot more compelling. But the fact that there is a family link with the person mentioned in Jeremiah 26:20-23 is also significant. So, even if it's not the same prophet, and even though it is, I would have think back then, many prophets would have gotten out of Israel. In those last days of Israel,
anyone who heard the voice of God and God was saying, hey, this alliance with Egypt is not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. The prophets would have left.
Yeah. I think one of the things is that in the last days of Judah, a lot of prophets got out of town just because the criticism would have been so intense against the king, they would have had to fear for their lives. So I think that too might be very indicative. That it might not be just one prophet getting out of Israel. It might have been many. But the article also mentions a second letter. It's also interesting in its own way, which is Lachish number 4.
That one was very interesting.
Yeah, it describes a little detail that we find in Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 1, which mentions the use of signal fires to warn of the invading Babylonian Empire. Now, what we see here is that in this particular Lachish number 4 letter, it mentions that they can no longer see a clear line of sight to Azekah. Now, what's interesting about this is that when the Babylonians invade, they have to hit Azekah first, and then Lachish, and then Jerusalem. So they have to go through, they're going through the Shephelah Valley. They're hitting these big, powerful Judite cities as they go along the way. Now,
and the article mentions initially people took this as geographic, that they couldn't see the cities of Azekah.
Yeah.
They were geographically unable, so they were watching the cities that they could physically see.
Yeah.
But the article goes on that there's a much more dramatic reading of this that's possible.
And I think that more dramatic is more likely. And that dramatic reading is that the signal fire from Azekah had gone out.
That Babylon had already come in, captured the city, and conquered it.
Yes.
And that was the message, that the signal fire from Azekah no longer burned.
Yeah. Now, they would have started that signal fire upon the invasion. And they would have kept that signal fire burning as long as they were under siege. And as soon as that, if the army had gone, they would have sent an all-clear message. But
yes.
They didn't.
And that was life in the ancient Near Eastern culture, is you watched that signal fire, hoped for an all-clear, and if the fire just went out, you really started despairing.
Yeah, there was real cause to worry. So
you were next.
You were next, and that's what this letter seems to be about. Is that Lachish saw that the signal fire at Azekah had gone out.
So these letters are from the final days.
These are from the final days of the Israelite kingdom.
Right before they lost their independence to Babylon.
Exactly.
So they're very exciting finds.
They're very, very interesting. We combine this with, other things that we've learned from the ancient Near East. And, this is one of the things I really like about this particular article, is it takes a well-provenanced, a solid inscription that gives us really good information about ancient Israel. It's not flashy, it's not glamorous, but it gives us a wealth of info that just gives us so much more. This is why I like this stuff a lot more than, say, the Mount
confirms.
Ebel.
Yeah.
The recent Mount Ebel fiasco. Because there's good inscriptions. Really, really solid good inscriptions. A lot of solid info. If we just focused on the solid info, we wouldn't need the rest.
Exactly.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up here. We want to thank all our Patreon supporters who help keep us going. And again, this is our way of thanking you by producing content that you see first. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed this. Have a great night.